Hey, what's up? Welcome back to another video right here on ON1 Photos. Today, I have another quick edit video for you, and I hope you enjoy it. So let's just go ahead and jump right into the computer and get started. So here we are inside of ON1 Photo RAW 2025, and I have this photo of a leaf that's on a tree. Nothing spectacular, but sometimes I think these kind of images are just fun to edit and work with, especially when you have full range of creativity to do whatever you want to do with the image. So that's exactly what we're going to do here today. But before we jump into that, a lot of people have been asking me, how do you make these icons over here turn into a list view? I guess they've been watching the Photo RAW 2026 previews over on the ON1 channel. And so I want to show you that this has been a thing. I don't know how far back it is, but if you have the 2025 version of ON1, what you can do is come up here to View, hover over Preset Browser, and you can change this to a list. And what that does is it makes all of your presets turn into a list view. So if you don't really care for those thumbnails, or maybe you have those really odd looking thumbnails over here, like these little things right here, and you are like, I just don't want to see that, well, then you can go ahead and do that. But for today's purposes, I'm just going to go ahead and close down the left pane because we don't need it. I'm not using a preset. Now let's get into the edit. First thing that I want to do is come over to the develop module, and I'm going to activate Brilliance AI because I think that that's going to give me a good base. Now, that mileage varies for every single user inside of ON1, and I get that, but I like to use the Brilliance AI just to get me started. So here's where we started, and here's where it's taken us so far. I like this. I can work with that. I'm not even going to tweak anything more. So the next step is jumping into local. Now, the reason I come to local is when I really want to reshape the light in a way that gives me something a little bit more dynamic. I want to specify the light in certain areas. So let's just go ahead and add an adjustment, and negative exposure is going to work out just fine for us. I'm going to hit the letter W on my keyboard because this gives me the quick mask AI brush, which I love using so much inside of this software. So I use it pretty much on every edit, and I'm just going to click and drag over this main leaf and it selects it. So I probably could have hovered over it, but I just like to make sure that I get it selected there. Everything is pretty good to go. Now, sometimes I like to select extra areas, and I'm going to go ahead and do it this time just because I don't want to have to come back and remask this. I'd rather erase the effect from this area if I don't like what happens. What I need to do now is erase this from my mask because I want the background to get dark or to receive this negative exposure adjustment. So you can see I already have erase selected, and then I'm just going to click the blue check mark. And what that does is it cuts out a hole around those leaves, so that way the leaves don't get that light adjustment. Now, this is way too drastic for me. All right. So instead of playing around with the exposure here, I'm just going to use the opacity slider because I really just like using the opacity slider. It helps blend things in a little bit better. So I think that that looks pretty good. Now, the next step is working with the contrast of the background. Let me just go ahead and hit the Z key to use my zoom tool. That way we don't have the little lagging brush thing going on. What I want to do is remove some of the contrast in the background because a less contrasty background is going to help the photo, in my opinion, pop a little bit more. So I'm just going to pull back on the contrast here, and I think that that works pretty well. It may be hard to see, so let me just go ahead and pull back on the exposure even further, and somewhere around here is probably right where I want to be. I know that I lowered the opacity earlier, but it makes sense, all right, for my personal taste. So let's just turn this off, turn it back on, and I don't know. Maybe this leaf does not need to have as much of the adjustment. So I'm going to get my brush tool using the letter B on the keyboard, and what I want to do is kind of paint away the brightness that still remains on this left leaf over here. I want to paint that away a bit. All right. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to come up here to the masking or the brush icon, and I'm going to click on this little square. Then I'm going to click on properties. And what you can do is lower the opacity of your paintbrush. So I'm going to pull the opacity down, let's say about 23. We'll call it good on that. And I'm not going to necessarily explain what's going on here other than I'm going to paint at 23% opacity in this area. So what that allows me to do is I'm going to bring in a little bit of that adjustment of the background onto this leaf. And I need to change this over to paint because I am on erase right now. And then I'm just going to go ahead and paint over this leaf, and it's going to darken it down just a little bit. And you can see that it blends, at least in my opinion, a little bit better. Sometimes this is a way that I recommend working, especially if you want things to look as natural as possible. You got to bring some of the dark areas back into the image, or bright areas back into the image, whatever it may be. It makes sense. All right. I don't want to belabor this. However, what I always recommend is that you come back, and I guess I could have changed the opacity up here. I don't know what I was thinking. I made changing my opacity of the brush way too difficult. In the option menu here, or options bar, I could have just clicked and dragged that opacity down, but whatever. Now you know that you can click this little square and it'll get you some of those tools. All right, so I got that going the way that I want. And now it's time to kind of bring a little bit of interest into this leaf area. And one of the ways that I like to do that is through color grading. So I don't need to do any more lighting adjustments inside of local. Let's just jump over to effects. I'm going to hit add filter. And I think the first filter that I want to throw in here is, let's go with the color balance. All right, we'll just go ahead and get our color grading into this image in the way that I think makes sense. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my shadows because I always like to start with my shadows, and I'm going to cool them off just a little bit by moving the center node inside of this little color wheel that is labeled shadows. I'm just going to move this center circle towards the blue colors, which are a little bit cooler. And that's going to help cool down the shadows, which typically in real life, when we see shadows, they're usually cool. Now, you could get artistic with this and you could say, I want to warm up the shadows, which gives a completely different look overall. But I'm just going to go ahead and pull it into the blues. And then I'm going to take this little balance slider underneath shadows, and I'm going to pull this over to the left. And what it's going to do is really darken down that blue color in the shadowed area. All right. And then of course, I'm going to come over to the highlights, and I'm going to go the opposite direction that I went with my shadows, because that's called the complementary color if you're not familiar with color theory. And you don't have to be, because you could literally just move this around and play with it until you get something you like. But I'm going to go opposite of the blue color that I just added. So, and it's not perfect, just ballparking it here. All right. And maybe somewhere around there. And then I'm going to brighten this highlight color up. Now, there's not much highlights in this image. This image has probably more shadow tones, and you can see that by looking at the histogram here. The brighter areas are this blown out sky, and then we have some bright areas on the leaf. So I'm not really injecting that much color into the bright areas. However, we do have some information here in the midtones. And so that's where color balance really comes in handy, because I could have just used a split tone filter and that would have given me a color to put in the shadows and a color to put into the highlights. However, I want to also apply color into the midtone. So that's where this midtone circle or color wheel comes in handy. And I'm also going to move this into the warmer toned, the warmer color range, which is going to be probably leaning more towards red. And I think that this is going to look pretty good right there. And I can play around with this if I want to darken it or brighten it, which I think brightening it just a little bit, brightening it just a little bit, let me say the word properly, comes out pretty good. So let's go ahead and turn off color balance, and you can see this is just a really green image. And then when I apply the color balance, it gives it a little bit more of a color grade look. And this is purely subjective and stylistic and personal choice / preference. All right. But I'm not done with this image yet. The next thing that I want to do is kind of make this look more old school filmy. All right. So I'm going to do, I guess, maybe 3 moves to get there. The first one is going to be adding in a curves filter. And the curves filter is pretty straightforward. I am going to grab the black point and I'm just going to fade that. Now I'm going to come back and adjust this a little bit later. I don't need to put a huge fade on it right now because I am going to come back and adjust this a little bit later. But I do want to put a slight S curve, which is going to reintroduce some of the contrast. Now, what you have to be careful with when you are emulating any sort of film stock is, unless the film stock was characteristically contrasty, then you don't want to put like a super S curve, like something like that. That isn't going to look the greatest. You could, it's your image, it's subjective, but typically a really slight S curve will help bring this photo back to life for some of that faded film stock. Now, you'll notice if I hold down the J key, this sky is blown out. I've shown this trick on previous videos and I'm not planning to print this, but if I were to print this, I can come over here to my white output on the curve and I can just pull that down, hold the J key, and you can see I'm no longer getting that clipping warning. You can also see that the little triangle in the histogram has now gone away from that. You don't need a whole lot of that, because essentially what you're telling ON1 to do, or I guess, yeah, what ON1 is telling the image is there shouldn't be any extreme whites because the brightest white point is 249. And if there is anything that's in that range, then we know what color to put down for that, and or luminance value, I should say, to put down for that. And 249 is in the standard range of visibility inside of ON1. All right. So that way you don't get those clipping warnings. If that's way too technical for you, don't worry about it. Just pull that little slider, or I'm sorry, this node down just a little bit until you see that clipping go away, and then you're good to go. All right. So I've jabbered enough about the curves. Let's move on to the second aspect, and that is going to be film grain. So we're going to come over here to film grain, and it doesn't matter which film grain you go with. I just like 400 stock or 400 speed film grain. That seems to give me the filmic look that I like in my personal images, but you could do whatever you choose to. And I will make the size a little bit larger for this particular image. I don't always do that, but I like the texture that I'm getting right here. And of course, the next thing that we're going to add is a texture, all right? And the texture is what's really going to help, I think, sell the creative look that we're going for here. But before that, there is one more stylistic thing that I think I want to do. So I'm going to hit add, and we're going to go with a sun flare. And let's find a sun flare that fits this particular image, because there's this opportunity to just play off of that light that's coming in from the upper right and really hone in on that ability, or that aesthetic, if you will, in the photo. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull down on the amount slider here, because I don't need it to be a whole lot, but that's just enough to give this look. And I like the warmth that it's giving in the entire image. So I'm going to go with that. Here's what it looks like without the sun flare, and here's what it looks like with the sun flare. And by the way, this is a stock sun flare. It's in ON1 by default, so everyone should have access to it. So if that's something you want to give a go, then you have that. All right, now it's time to add the texture filter. So let's come over here and grab textures. Boom. That looks amazing. Nah, I'm kidding. It does not look that great. We're going to come to category, and I have a category on my, or loaded into ON1, called Dusty Film Grain. And the dusty film grain look, in my opinion, is what's going to help me sell this look of old, weathered, or beaten film. All right. And that's really what I want to go for here. But in order to do it, I need to change the blend mode here from subtle over to lighter. All right. Because again, this is film, and typically, especially on a sunny day like this, I would have a brighter exposure if I'm using 400 speed film and all that good stuff. So that's that. But now it's time to change the actual texture overlay and see what makes the most sense for this image. And to do that, if you come over here to where it says texture, then you can just start pressing the downward arrow until you find one that fits for your particular photo. Let's see if we find one that looks pretty good here. I actually like this one. So number 20. Not that that's of any significance. If 20 is, then whatever. That's just the number of this particular texture. And then we'll come down here and we'll brighten it up just a little bit. And that helps. You can see what happens when you brighten this up. All right. And I'll pull the opacity down just a bit so that way it looks like it's more naturally faded into the image. And I think that that looks pretty good. So we'll close down textures. Now, I could stop right here, but remember I said that if we go back to the curves, or that we would be coming back to the curves. And the reason for that is I think it needs a little bit more of a fade, and there are plenty of ways of getting a faded look inside of ON1, but I think using the curves filter here is really going to help out with that. So what I'm going to do is just remove the control point that was in the shadows, and I'm also going to remove the control point that was in the highlights, just so that way I can see how much fade I'm applying to this overall image. And then what I'm also going to do is make the image a little bit more contrasty just by grabbing the black node and moving it over to the right. When you do that, it's going to darken down the photo just a little bit. And I'm still maintaining that fade, but I'm also getting a good base contrast. So I'll go maybe somewhere around here. And then, of course, to bring back that subtle S curve, I can just drop that back in. And I think that that looks pretty good, like so. So if I turn off the curve, you'll see the image. I mean, it looks okay, but it doesn't quite look realistic that it's a film emulation or that I'm simulating film. But this brings a little bit more of that filmic look. And to really finish this whole thing off, I'm going to come up here to the top, make sure that when I add this filter, I'm going to add in borders. And I really love using the white simple border. You could stop right there and, you could use that, but I don't want to use the white simple border. I want something a little bit more unique, if you will. So we're going to jump into, I have one, I don't know, I think it's film frames, or maybe it's film. I think it's film. And this one should be in ON1 for everyone. So if you got ON1 25, then you should have access to this, if I'm not mistaken. And let's see here. No, I feel like these are a little like corny. I don't want to use that. I want something that's going to look like it was like old slide film that this was captured on. And, again, we're just having fun. All right. So let's just go through these really quickly. Okay. old medium format seems to do the trick, but I need to resize the frame. All right. So let's go ahead and pull down on the scale. And I just want to get those numbers off. I don't think the numbers are doing it any justice, but I do like how this is going over the frame, like into the actual image. I like what that's doing. If I turn it off and turn it back on, you can see exactly what's happening there. Maybe scale it just a little bit more, so it's like just at the edges. And maybe we'll pull down the opacity so it really does look like old film. Yeah, I think that that looks pretty good. You let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section. This is all subjective. I'm just having a good time playing around with ON1 and styling this image. So if I hold down the backslash key, this is what we came into ON1 Photo RAW with. And then if I let it go, this is what we've created. You let me know what your thoughts are about this particular look, but the goal here isn't for you to deliberately create exactly what I created. It's to get you to understand that you can play around with these tools and come up with things that weren't in the original image, like so. Now, for some people, this is overboard. You would never want to do something like this, and that's perfectly fine. But for those of you who want to have a little bit of fun with your photography, I think that this is just a great technique to explore with and just have a little bit of fun. All right. That's the goal here. Now, of course, if you want to pick up ON1 Photo RAW 2026, there is a pre-order sale going on right now. You can use the link in the description box below. And when you check out, if you use FreeWill10 between now and October 31st, 2025, you'll save $10 on the sale price of whichever version of ON1 that you select. And of course, you'll also get a discount if you choose to go with the subscription model. Completely up to you, but also no pressure to use that if you don't want to. If you got questions and you want to learn how to use ON1 Photo RAW and really develop a workflow that's going to be tailored to you and your style of editing and style of photography, a coaching call is probably the best thing to sign up for. And I will help you develop a workflow, or I'll answer specific questions about ON1. So if there's something that you really need help with and the videos on YouTube just aren't cutting it, well, a coaching call is probably one of the things that you're looking for that'll help you out. If you want to do that, check the description box below. There's a link to sign up for a coaching call today. Until next time, I want you to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.